They told me I didn't belong here, that I was too broke, too broken, and too bold to build that in this neighborhood. But I wasn't trying to fit in. I was rebuilding me. The truck made more noise than I wanted it to. The engine coughed, the trailer rattled, and the whole thing looked like it barely held together, because it didn't. But it was mine. Everything left after the divorce sat on those wheels. Tools, reclaimed wood, a mattress, blueprints I'd drawn by hand, and the last bit of dignity I'd managed to scrape together. The HOA didn't know what was coming, and honestly, neither did I. The neighborhood had a smell, chlorine, trimmed grass, and the kind of perfume that never leaves a real estate office. The houses stood like monuments to money. White columns, perfect paint, 3-car garages that probably had matching golf carts. I'd seen places like this before, usually from the outside. Now I was driving in, turning heads, and making enemies before I even parked. The trailer squealed as I backed it into the empty lot I'd bought in a court-ordered auction. Cheapest slice of land in the entire development. There was a reason for that. No one wanted it. It was too close to the fence, had no view, and used to hold a pool house that burned down in '08. But for me, it was a blank canvas, and blank was all I could afford. I stepped out of the truck, and the air changed. I could feel eyes on me, even if I couldn't see the faces. Somewhere behind a shutter, a curtain shifted. A wind chime tinkled, fake and polite. Then the silence snapped with the sound of heels. Click, click, click. She wore white, like she was trying to outshine the picket fences. Blonde hair, hard smile, clipboard in hand. The kind of woman who made you feel like you were late for something even when you weren't. She didn't wave, she didn't blink. She just stood there, angled like a lighthouse, warning, not guiding. "You must be the new neighbor," she said, as if the word had something sour in it. "We weren't expecting a trailer." I smiled, not out of politeness, but to keep from saying something I'd regret. "Well, here I am." "Here you are," she echoed, eyes flicking from the truck to the trailer to the lot, like scanning for code violations by instinct. I didn't ask her name. I didn't need to. Every HOA has a Karen. She was just earlier than I expected. As I unlatched the trailer and started unloading, she didn't move, just watched, judged, calculated. I could feel it. The tape measure in her mind was already ticking. Fence line, setback, roof slope, paint shade, threat level. "Don't worry," I said finally. "I know the rules." Her smile twitched like a glitch in a program. "I hope so. We're very particular here." I noticed. That night, I slept in the trailer. No walls, no plumbing, just stars through a cracked skylight and the sound of sprinklers whispering across imported grass. I had no plan for war. I just wanted to build something beautiful. But from the moment my tires touched their perfect street, I knew this neighborhood wasn't ready for me. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't ready for it either. She showed up the next morning like a white-gloved ambassador of suburban grace. I was sitting on the trailer's makeshift step, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, when she walked across the lawn, if you could call that patch of dead weeds a lawn. She had a plate of cookies balanced in one hand and something tucked beneath her arm. Her stride was confident, but rehearsed, like this was part of a welcome parade she'd been dying to perform. "Good morning," she chirped, as if last night's tension had evaporated with the dew. "I thought I'd bring you a little something." I stared at the plate. Oatmeal raisin, of course. The cookie nobody really likes, but everyone pretends is wholesome. "Thanks," I said, reaching for one to be polite. She handed me the plate with the kind of smile that made my stomach twist, not because of the sugar, but because it felt weaponized. Then she pulled out what was under her arm and set it on my lap like it was a Bible. The HOA rulebook. Not a copy. Her copy. Laminated, color-coded tabs, sticky notes, cross-referenced citations. There was even a legend in the front. Yellow for landscaping, blue for exterior modifications, pink for noise ordinances, and green for ongoing concerns. "I thought you might want to get a head start," she said sweetly. "Some of the rules are a little nuanced." I flipped it open. Page 1 already had a note in red ink. See Section 5B. Structure height limitations. Applies to all builds, including non-traditional dwellings. I closed it. "What's your name?" I asked. "Karen," she said. And I nearly laughed. She didn't even try to hide it. "Well, Karen," I said, "I appreciate the warm welcome." She didn't blink. "We just like to keep things consistent here. That's all." I looked around at the carbon copy homes, the factory-stamped mailboxes, the symmetrical flower beds. It was like stepping into a simulation. No wrinkles, no risk, just comfort smothered in regulation. "I'll do my best," I said, setting the rule book beside me like it might bite. Karen didn't move. She lingered. I could tell she was trying to get a read on me. What kind of man moves into a place like this with a trailer and no lawnmower? "Just so you're aware," she added with a tilt of her head, "the HOA meets on Tuesdays. That's where we discuss things." Looking forward to it. It was a lie. She left without another word, but her perfume stuck in the air like static. I watched her walk away, crisp and upright, like she'd just won the first round of a game I hadn't agreed to play. That afternoon, I started sketching new angles on the frame, stronger curves, hidden compartments, fold-out panels. If I had to live in a box, I'd build one she'd never understand. And maybe that was the point. Karen had given me cookies and a rule book, but her smile, that was a warning shot. It happened 2 days in. I was unloading reclaimed cedar boards from the trailer when I heard it. Casual but sharp. The kind of thing you say with a fake laugh and a real purpose. I didn't even catch who said it at first. The voice came from across the street, somewhere near the SUV with the spotless rims and the man adjusting his golf visor like he was preparing for combat. "You're too poor for this neighborhood," he said, just loud enough for the others nearby to hear, just loud enough to make sure I did too. No one laughed, but no one pushed back either. That was the part that stuck. The silence after that felt like a verdict. I kept stacking the boards like I hadn't heard a thing. Let the wood slam harder than necessary. Let the dust rise. My hands kept moving, but my chest burned in that slow, stupid way it does when someone punches where they weren't supposed to. It wasn't just the insult, it was how quickly they decided who I was, what I was worth. One guy watered his lawn across the street like it was a performance, dragging the hose slowly while pretending not to look. A woman jogged by, slowing ever so slightly as she passed my trailer, her eyes scanning it like she was reading graffiti. Another neighbor had a phone to his ear and pointedly turned his back, but angled his body just enough to keep me in view. Suburbia surveillance. Quiet, relentless, and always watching. I wasn't wearing the right uniform. No collared shirt, no golden retriever, no yoga mat in sight. Just jeans with dust in the seams and boots worn through the heel. My truck still had duct tape on the side mirror, and the trailer's taillight was cracked. The whole setup screamed, "Not from here," but I was here, and I wasn't leaving. The voice, whoever it was, never came over, never looked me in the eye, just dropped the line and let it do its work, like poison in a well. That's how people like that operate. They don't need confrontation, just suggestion, just tone. They weaponize politeness until it cuts deeper than anything honest ever could. I went back to work, dragging the boards inside the foundation frame I'd poured by hand the day before. Every plank I set down felt heavier than it should have, but I pressed on. One wall, one corner, one stubborn act at a time. That night I stayed up drawing, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the voice, that one sentence, that one moment. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong here. But that didn't mean I was going anywhere. I wasn't building a house to impress them. I was building something they wouldn't understand, something no amount of money could buy. And the best part? They were going to have to watch me do it. By the end of the first week, the foundation was in place and the frame had begun to rise, awkward, asymmetrical, and far too strange for the tastefully bland neighborhood it now stood in. From across the street, it probably looked like a shed on stilts, or worse, like I didn't know what I was doing, which in fairness wasn't entirely false. I was improvising more than I'd admit, but the vision was clear, even if they couldn't see it yet. They thought it was a joke, a mistake, a midlife crisis you could nail together with scrap wood. I saw them driving by slower now, windows down, kids with their noses pressed to the glass, adults frowning like they were being forced to watch someone paint graffiti on a church. Some of them even took pictures, not out of admiration, for evidence, for later. Karen had stopped waving. Instead, she stood at the end of her driveway every morning, arms crossed like a bouncer at the gate of a club I was never getting into. Her smile was gone, replaced by the look people wear when they're calculating fines. She'd started circling parts of her rulebook in red, and I knew it wasn't for decoration. But I kept building. The walls were hollow, sure, but only for now. Hidden inside the studs were conduits, tubes, and small recessed spaces for fold-out furniture, retractable counters, and a staircase that would double as a bookshelf. Every line I drew in the design had a purpose. Every corner was planned, not for grandeur, but for possibility. Because this wasn't just a house, it was an experiment, a question. What if small didn't mean less? What if beauty came from function? What if a home could breathe? No one understood it yet, and that was okay. They weren't meant to. This wasn't for them. The roof had a strange slope, angled not for aesthetics, but to catch rainwater and redirect it into a self-filtering tank system. The west-facing wall would eventually be covered in vines, cooling the space without air conditioning. The insulation wasn't foam or fiberglass. It was recycled denim, packed tight and soft as memory. I knew because I'd stuffed every inch of it with my own hands, long past midnight. From the sidewalk it just looked weird, too low, too narrow, too humble. But inside it was a cathedral, not of marble or stained glass, but of intention. Every inch mattered, every line whispered a story. I wasn't building big, I was building smart, and the more they didn't understand it, the more I realized that was the point. They wanted square footage, I wanted soul, and I'd take that trade every time. It started with a yellow slip, just one, tucked neatly under the handle of my trailer door like a passive-aggressive love note. Notice of violation, it said at the top in bold, joyless font. Beneath that, it detailed an infraction. Unapproved temporary structure parked on private lot. No fine yet, just a warning, a nudge. The next day there were two. One taped to the door again, and a second fluttering under a rock by the front wheel of my truck. Improper building materials stored in view of public thoroughfare. This time, a fine, $75, due in 10 days. By the end of the week, my front wall had become a bulletin board of bureaucratic poetry. Noise complaints, aesthetic violations, permit inconsistencies. One even cited aggressive sawing after 6 p.m. I laughed when I read that one. Aggressive? Was I supposed to whisper to the wood? I started pinning them up inside the trailer, not because I was proud, but because I needed to remind myself what I was up against. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about survival, not in the dramatic life or death way. No, this was the slow bleed. Paper cuts, backhanded policy, and a system designed to exhaust. Karen never delivered the notes herself. That would have been too honest. Instead, she sent them through the proper channels, which somehow made them feel worse, as if the entire neighborhood had voted to make me disappear, one signature at a time. I tried calling the HOA once, got an automated line, left a message, never heard back. So I adjusted. I moved the lumber behind a temporary screen. I painted the trailer's door a neutral shade consistent with community guidelines. I stopped using power tools after dusk, even though my head spun with ideas at night and my hands itched to keep building, but it didn't matter. They just found new reasons. Trash bin visible from street. Lack of sod on front lawn. Construction progress deemed visually disruptive. Visually disruptive. Like the idea of something different was a threat to the neighborhood's immune system. I wondered if any of them knew what it felt like, to be judged not for who you are, but for what you're trying to make. To be punished for creating something with your own hands, simply because it didn't match the blueprint of a life they recognized. One night, I stood outside and looked at the wall of letters, each one fluttering slightly in the breeze. It looked like an art installation now, my own silent protest. A paper-thin record of every rule I'd broken, most of which hadn't even existed until I showed up. I wasn't just building a house anymore, I was building defiance, and they were handing me the nails, one letter at a time. The mornings started cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. Even under the sun, the lot felt colder than it should have. I'd open the trailer door, step out onto unfinished ground, and feel that familiar chill in the air, the kind that only comes when no one wants you there. The stares, the silence, the weight of being an outsider with no buffer, no backup, and no exit plan. But every morning, I worked. There was no team, no contractor, just me, a pile of salvage materials, and the belief, maybe foolish, maybe desperate, that I could still build something worth standing inside. This house wasn't a project. It was a response to the marriage that crumbled, to the career I let slide, to the feeling that I had nothing left that anyone wanted. Every nail I hammered in, every joint I cut flush, it was all a kind of proof. I still had hands that could make something, I still had ideas that meant something, and if I was going to be alone, then at least I'd have walls that knew me. Some nights I didn't sleep. Not out of stress, not exactly, just a kind of ache that sat too deep to ignore. I'd sit on the subfloor with a pencil and a scrap of plywood and draw. Not plans, not structures, just lines, curves, shapes that didn't have to explain themselves. I didn't even realize how much I missed the feel of graphite until my hand started to cramp. That cramp felt like home. I used to design for other people, their vision, their rules. Now I was building for me. This place, this little strange box with its folding walls and hidden compartments and rain-catching roof, it was the first time I wasn't compromising. And yet it still felt like I was being punished for daring to try. Every time Karen filed another complaint, every time a new letter showed up taped to the wood, I'd wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe I was a fool. Maybe I was too poor for this neighborhood, too broken to fix. Maybe this wasn't defiance, it was delusion. But then I'd walk inside. No paint yet, no tile. Just exposed wood and insulation and the smell of sawdust. But I'd stand in the center and see it all. How the light would move through the high window in the morning. How the sleeping loft would wrap around the corner like an embrace. How the kitchen would disappear into the wall like a magician's trick. It wasn't finished, but it was already beautiful. I didn't need their approval. I just needed proof that I could still make something real, that I could still be someone real. Because when everything else had been taken, when the house was gone, when the vows were broken, when the titles and savings had disappeared, this little structure on this rejected patch of land, it was all I had left. And I wasn't giving it up. He showed up on a Wednesday, the kind of day when the air feels just thick enough to ruin your shirt by noon. I was on the roof, adjusting the angle of a rain diverter, when a white SUV with government plates crawled up to the curb. He didn't step out right away, just sat there for a moment, engine running, doors shut, like he was rehearsing. When he finally emerged, clipboard in hand, aviators on, it was with the confidence of a man who expected to find violations before he even stepped foot on the lot. His shirt had a badge stitched to the pocket, his belt carried tools he wouldn't use, and his boots were clean, too clean for someone who worked in the dirt. Karen trailed behind him at a distance, close enough to bask in the authority, far enough to pretend it wasn't personal. She smiled like this was Christmas morning, and she'd just handed me my stocking full of coal. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm here to perform an inspection of your structure. There have been numerous complaints." I climbed down the ladder slowly, brushing sawdust off my hands. "Let me guess. Noise? Materials? Disruptive aesthetics?" He didn't smile. "I just need access inside." I nodded, wiped my palms on my jeans, and opened the main door. What he expected, I'll never know. Maybe a plywood shack with loose wires and mold in the corners. But what he got was light. Natural light filtering through the angled skylights and bouncing softly across the walls. The inside looked nothing like the shell they all saw from the street. It was warm, clever, efficient. The cedar walls breathed. The furniture folded into the walls and unfolded like secrets. The countertop was a single slab of reclaimed walnut. No wasted space, no harsh lines. Every detail had a reason. He stepped in, took off his glasses, and blinked like he was seeing color for the first time. "You built this yourself?" he asked, voice quieter now. "Every inch." He ran his hand along the edge of a hidden drawer, then knelt to look beneath the modular stairs that doubled as storage. He tapped the wall, checked the outlets, studied the filtration system by the rear window. He didn't ask questions about the square footage. He didn't mention Karen. He just walked. And when he was done, he stood in the center of the room, shook his head slightly and said, "This doesn't break the code. If anything, it might be ahead of it." Karen's face stiffened. She stepped forward. "But the exterior..." He cut her off gently. "There's nothing I can cite here. It's compliant." She didn't say another word, just stared at the door as he stepped back outside. He paused before getting in his SUV, looked at me one more time, and said something I didn't expect. "You ever think about teaching this stuff?" Then he drove off. Karen didn't stick around. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking like punctuation. Let them look. This home had secrets, and none of them were sorry. They thought they'd seen it all. From the outside, it looked like a box. One of those prefab sheds you find behind hardware stores. Too narrow, too low, too unfinished. But they didn't understand the folds. They didn't see the moments built into the seams. The beauty of it wasn't loud. It didn't shout through columns or gleam through marble. It whispered, soft, intentional, like someone speaking a language only a few people still remembered. I built it like a magician builds a stage, so that what you see is never quite everything that's there. The living space doubled in size when you knew how to move through it. The couch wasn't a couch. It was a storage chest that slid out and became steps to the loft above. The kitchen counter flipped open like a puzzle box, revealing a full sink, a 2-burner induction cooktop, and a fold-away cutting board that snapped perfectly into place. The ceiling fan dropped from a recessed slot that blended into the paneling like it had always been part of the sky. I hadn't just drawn these features, I dreamt them. In those long, sleepless nights when the silence of the trailer made my ears ring, I had closed my eyes and imagined the movement of space like a dance, a home that changed depending on what it was asked to do, not just a place to live, but a place that responded. Karen and her friends saw disorder, but if they had stepped inside, really looked, they'd have seen the kind of harmony you can't buy in catalogs. The walls were layered in reclaimed birch, sealed with a matte oil that smelled faintly of citrus and memory. Even the light had a job, angled windows catching sunrise in the morning and bouncing warmth across the room until dusk. There was a reading nook hidden behind a sliding panel near the back. No one knew it was there but me. A space just big enough for a cushion, a small lamp, and a shelf of the books I refused to part with after the divorce. The titles were worn, some pages stained, but they felt like friends that had made it through the fire with me. And above, tucked beneath the sloped roof, the sleeping loft waited, simple, open, and quiet. No TV, just a window facing east, where I could wake with the sun and feel like I still belonged to the world. Everything had a reason. Everything had a place. Even me. That night, I lit a candle, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see how the shadows moved across the walls. I sat in the center of it all, alone, but not lonely, and listened. The house didn't creak or complain. It just breathed. They could call it strange. They could call it wrong. But this home knew what it was. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. It was a Saturday when the black sedan pulled up. No HOA decals, no tinted windows, just quiet elegance, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. I was sanding down the kitchen drawer faces, trying to get the grain to shine just right, when I noticed the man stepping out. Tall, grey hair, pressed shirt. He looked around once, slowly, as if he were taking in more than just the house. He was measuring something deeper. I didn't recognize him, but he walked with that particular weight, like someone who used to design the sky and now only builds shadows of it. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. Not demanding, just present. "Be my guest," I said, stepping aside. He didn't start with questions. He started with his eyes, moved through the entry with the kind of care usually reserved for art galleries or church aisles. He touched the birch paneling with his fingertips, barely grazing it, like he was checking for a pulse. I watched him kneel by the staircase, unlatch the fold-out mechanism I'd built into the bottom step, and pull it forward. It became a bench, then a shelf, then a drawer. I said nothing. He stood, eyes lifted to the exposed trusses above. "You used a modified butterfly joint to stabilize the curve?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Not traditional, I know, but the load holds." He smiled. Not wide, but real. "Not traditional is exactly what I was hoping for." He walked the perimeter slowly, examining each angle, each transition, until he finally stopped by the fold-down table near the window. "You don't waste space," he said. "Didn't have the luxury," I replied. He turned to me then, truly looked at me for the first time, not as a man with a trailer, not as an outsider, but as a builder. "This is beautiful," he said. "Efficient. Alive." No one had said that to me in years. I learned later that his name was Ethan Bell, retired architect, taught at Cal Poly for a decade, designed houses that graced the covers of magazines. He didn't come to mock or report or inspect. He came because a neighbor, one of the quieter ones apparently, told him, "You need to see what this guy is doing over on Hemlock Court." We spent an hour talking about curves versus lines, about form meeting purpose, about where architecture stopped being utility and became emotion. Before he left, he turned at the door and said, "This reminds me why I got into this field in the first place." Then he looked across the street, where Karen was pretending to garden, but holding a phone just high enough to record. "Some people see rules," he said. "Others see possibility." He smiled again, tipped an invisible hat, and walked back to his car. I stood at the door long after he was gone, not because I needed more validation, but because for the first time since I started building, someone saw the home the way I saw it, and they called it genius. The letter came hand-delivered, tucked into a red envelope with gold trim, like an invitation to a wedding you didn't want to attend, but knew you couldn't ignore. "Special HOA meeting, urgent community matter," it read in stiff, overly formal type. I didn't need to read between the lines. They wanted me gone. This wasn't about code violations anymore. It was about control. Tuesday night, the clubhouse smelled like lemon-scented floor cleaner and forced civility. Folding chairs lined up in rows, clipboards, coffee no one drank. And at the front, behind a collapsible plastic table, sat Karen like a judge in a courtroom of her own design. Her smile was back, tight, confident, sharpened at the edges. This was her arena. I walked in wearing my work boots and a clean shirt. Nothing fancy, just real. And I carried a black binder under my arm, not thick, but heavy with intent. The room fell quiet when I entered. Every face turned. Some wore curiosity, some wore open hostility. A few avoided eye contact altogether, like this was already a funeral. Karen didn't waste time. "We're here tonight to address an ongoing concern," she began, her voice smooth but icy. "A structure that, while technically not in violation of any single bylaw, has raised multiple community complaints regarding visual harmony, property value impact, and general neighborhood morale." She said all of that without looking at me once. "I believe," she continued, "that we as a community have the right to question whether this project aligns with the spirit of Hemlock Court." The crowd murmured in agreement. Papers rustled. A few heads nodded with the safety of the herd. I waited until she finished, then stood slowly and opened the binder. Inside, photographs, printouts, and design documentation. Not just of the house, but of the principles behind it. Sustainable architecture, innovative spatial design, ADA-compliant features, rainwater collection system breakdowns, comparative models, even a letter signed and notarized from Ethan Bell, retired architect and former professor, endorsing the structure as a landmark of modern micro-architecture. I handed copies to the board without speaking. Let them read. Let them see. Karen's lips thinned. I built this home, I said finally, because I had nothing left to prove except to myself. But now, apparently, I have to prove it to you. I clicked a small remote. Behind me, a projector hummed to life, casting slides on the blank clubhouse wall. Renderings, photos of the home at sunrise, detailed schematics showing load distribution and modular efficiency. The silence in the room thickened, not out of tension, but awareness. I wasn't just some guy with a trailer anymore. I was an artist, an engineer, a builder of more than walls. Karen shifted in her chair. Regardless of aesthetics, we're concerned about precedent. What if others? Start building smart, I interrupted. Start using less, creating more? No one moved. Someone near the back whispered, "Why are we even fighting this?" I closed the binder, met Karen's eyes and said, "I didn't come to ask permission. I came with proof, and I came prepared." She didn't smile again that night, and no vote was taken. It started with one car, just a stranger, slowing down to look, then another, and another. By the end of the week, the curb outside my lot looked like a parking lot for an open house no one had officially scheduled. Word had spread, quietly at first. A whisper from one neighbor to another passed over hedges and through dog-walking conversations. Someone had told someone about the architect. Someone had seen the pictures. Someone wanted to know what the hell was happening on Hemlock Court. So I opened the door, not for Karen, not for the HOA, for everyone else. I set a handwritten sign at the edge of the property. Curious? Come see for yourself. No RSVP, no tour times, just an open invitation. The house wasn't finished yet, but it didn't have to be. The story was already in the frame. They came. Old couples, young couples, retirees with curiosity in their steps, teenagers who thought it was some TikTok trend, a local contractor who shook his head like he didn't want to be impressed, but was. Even the mail carrier stepped inside on her lunch break and left whispering, "I've never seen anything like it." Some came expecting chaos, others a gimmick, but none of them left unchanged. They saw how the walls moved, how the dining table folded out from the bookshelf, how the loft steps became storage, how the air felt light and lived in, despite the square footage. They touched the wood, ran fingers across the recycled steel supports, looked up through the skylight and said things like, "Wow. And why can't more houses be like this?" I answered questions, not all of them. Some were better left to wonder. But I talked about the water system, the solar tiles, the airflow design. I showed them the nooks, the hidden desk, the way the bathroom door slid into the wall without a sound. Someone asked me if I'd ever considered building more of them, for others. Another asked if they could bring their son back. He was studying design. Karen didn't come, not officially, but I saw her, standing across the street, arms folded, eyes sharp, watching, measuring, trying to understand how the punchline had become a blueprint, trying to figure out when the crowd had stopped laughing and started listening. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. By dusk, the house was quiet again, the last visitors gone, but it didn't feel like before. The silence now held something new, not suspicion, not judgment, respect. It had taken weeks of judgment, fines, and sideways glances, but now the house was no longer an eyesore. It was a symbol, not just of resilience, but of beauty born from limits. And for the first time since I'd parked that old trailer on this street, I felt something settle deep inside me. Belonging. Not because I'd conformed, but because I hadn't. The morning after the reveal, I stood on the tiny porch I'd built from leftover cedar and drank my coffee slowly, letting the steam rise into the cool air. There were no new letters taped to the door, no angry voices over fences, just the sound of sprinklers firing up down the block, a dog barking half-heartedly, and the quiet breath of a neighborhood that didn't know what to do with me anymore. For weeks they had tried to shrink me, to file me down to fit their frame. But I hadn't broken. I'd bent a little, I'd adapted, but I hadn't disappeared, and now they knew I wasn't going to. Karen hadn't spoken to me since the meeting, not directly. She passed by once, stiff and silent, eyes darting over the house like she was still looking for a flaw she could weaponize. But her clipboard was gone. So was the smug certainty. I wasn't an intruder anymore. I was an inconvenience that refused to be temporary. And that was fine. I never came here to fight. I came to build. To rebuild, really. Not just the walls and windows, but something deeper. After the divorce, I had nothing but time and regret. I'd lost the big house, the one with the vaulted ceilings and the granite countertops, and the backyard just big enough to get lost in, but small enough to mow in 20 minutes. I'd lost the job that paid for it, lost the person I thought I was supposed to be. But this crooked little marvel of wood and light and purpose, this was mine. I ran my hand over the frame of the front door, felt the knots and grain beneath my fingers. Every inch of this place held a story. The screw I had to dig out by hand because I stripped the head. The section of roof I rebuilt twice because I couldn't sleep, knowing it sagged half an inch. The drawer I had to redesign when I realized it clashed with the curve of the wall at sunset. It wasn't perfect, but neither was I. And for once, that was okay. They could hold their HOA meetings, draft their memos, whisper over hedges, but they couldn't take this from me, because this house wasn't just shelter. It was proof that I could start over, that I could live small and still feel whole, that I didn't need a 3-car garage or cathedral ceilings or a membership to the tennis club to feel like a man. All I needed was this space, these walls, this peace. I poured the last of my coffee out for the soil near the front step. The vine was starting to climb, a little wild, a little stubborn, just like me. And I smiled, because I wasn't going anywhere, not today, not ever.